Good afternoon, everyone. We continue in our last segment with regards to Balaam, Bil'am in the Hebrew, but it appears that there is no mention of Balaam in chapter 25, but it has everything to do with Balaam when we get into chapter 25. And if you recall, Balaam was engaged by the king of Moab to curse Israel. And in each of the four times, he blessed Israel in the way where God wanted him to speak. And so he was very frustrated. Now, one of the passages that we casually had gone over is in chapter 24, and that's where we are going to begin to allude to this particular incident. So let us look at chapter 24, verse 14. Chapter 24, and in verse 14 is our key to chapter 25. It says this, that I am going to my people, that is Bil'am or Balaam. Come, I will advise you what this people will do to your people in the latter days. Now, just a quick one in verse 14. Verse 14 basically says this. The whole concept of advice is to give counsel. And in this counsel that Balaam gave, number one, came the fourth prophecy, and this is the blessing and with regards to what's going to happen in the future with to Israel and the neighboring nations. But the second part of this give counsel is Numbers 25. The counsel was how to cause God to curse Israel. You see, God never wanted to curse Israel because there is no basis, there's no reason for God to curse Israel. And Balaam advised Balak what he must do in order to get God himself to deal with the nation of Israel. And with this, we come to Numbers chapter 25. When we come to Numbers chapter 25, we need now to be aware that it has to do with this particular episode. The whole of chapter 25 is a disastrous chapter for Israel, but it is based on the advice that was given by Bil'am. And I think we can actually refer to Numbers chapter 31. Chapter 25. Chapter 25 is literally the advice given by Balaam. And this is what is going to happen. Israel remained in the acacia grove. I think this one, we should refer it to the place name called Shittim. Shittim. And although Shittim means the acacia wood, this word actually comes from the word scourge. Scourge. Scourge, and refers to the beating by God. It is a very appropriate name. And so that's where they are, in the place called Shittim. And the people began to commit harlotry with the women of Moab. Now, in this case, when we talk about harlotry, they are going to the men, essentially the Israelite men, were looking at the women of Moab and having fun with them, and getting more acquainted with them. At the same time, the word harlotry uh, also means uh, being unfaithful to God, where they bow down to other gods. So this is a play of word where the harlotry is both physically with the women of Moab, as well as religiously with the idols and the gods of these Moabite women. And as they are having fun together, the women then, well, this word invited, this word literally means call, right? Call the people, and the people here would be men, to the sacrifices of their gods. And the people ate, and then the people bowed down to their gods. This is the meaning of, well, in many translations, you translate as worship, but essentially it's to humble down, which is what God tells them not to do. Now, when you read these words, gods, I'm not sure whether you are aware, gods, they're gods. This word is Elohim. Yes, the word Elohim refers to Jehovah, the God of the Israelite. But that is a generic name. So we need to look at the context. When it is with reference to Jehovah, God, then we know that his name is also referenced as Elohim. But in a general statement, for example, their gods and their gods, they are also called gods. The pagan gods, the Moabite worship their gods. And their gods is called Baal Peor. Baal, Baal Peor is the name of their gods. Well, we say gods, there are various kinds of the Baal. The word Baal in itself is not a bad word. The word Baal literally means Lord. And in the Hebrew, the word Baal is used for the husband. It's also used for God himself, right? Jehovah himself. But in this particular uh, area, in the context of chapter 25, we see that this is with reference to the Lord of Peor. The Lord of Peor is a peculiar name, and it keeps referencing itself in Numbers chapter 31. I think you could read verses 15 and 16 about this incident. And let me just briefly explain to you why God is so angry with them. Baal of Peor is a particular deity that is very peculiar. And the way they honor the deity is to expose their backside and defecate. Means they pass motion, and it's a very dirty, a very vile expression of honor in this case. Everything that does not stand for Jehovah God, who is holy and pure. And Baal of Peor means Baal Peor is that kind of a god of the Moabites, right? Of the Moabites. And so because of the women, the men of the Israelites offered sacrifices to Baal of Peor. This in itself, it is an expression that they have decided to turn away from God. And in this case, probably not permanently, but they have been distracted and is co-joined because of the women that attracted them. And so the anger of the Lord was aroused against Israel. Now, whenever we read the anger of the Lord, it is the nose of God. And in this case, this is a depiction of serious, serious anger. And with the serious anger that God had, then God said to Moses, take all the leaders of the people. The leaders here are the ones who will judge the people, the ones who will handle the people. Remember the one episode where Moses actually divided the leaders up so that he doesn't have to handle all the problems. And he says, take all the leaders of the people and find the offenders. Now, this word offender doesn't quite make that cut. The word offender are the ones who cause themselves to be torn away from God. Okay, that's what it means by offenders. These are the ones whom the women of Moab called them to worship their gods, the Baal of Peor. And they wanted Moses to execute this, to take the offenders and hang them before God, in the face of God, out in the sun, that the fierce anger of the Lord may turn away from Israel. And so the fierce anger is about atonement, is to cover up their crimes, their sins, but they have to die. So the hang means to kill, to execute. But out in the sun means in public. For everyone to see, they are to be made into a spectacle, that God wants the rest who are not hung to know how serious God is with these kinds of activities, right? With women of Moab, not an Israelite, and going into harlotry with them and bowing down to their gods and making sacrifices to their gods. And thereby you find that these kinds of subtle changes from the men of Israel is what has caused God to be extremely angry. And so Moses said to the judges of Israel, these are the leaders, every one of you kill his men who were joined to Baal of Peor. Now understand, this would be by tribes. They are to go on a cleansing. They're on to go on a cleansing. And this up to verse 5 is extremely important, because this idea of killing the men who offended God, who turned away from God, who went to sacrifice to Baal Peor, this is called a plague. A plague or a slaughter. Now, slaughter means a sense of killing, right? And so this is what God says, I want you all to kill all the offenders. And so from that day, there is a great killing. Verse 6. This now tells us another episode. While that is happening, verse 6 says, one of the children of Israel came, presented to his brethren a Midianite woman in the sight of Moses and in the sight of all the congregation of the children of Israel. who were weeping at the door of the tabernacle of meeting. Now, this is a very peculiar event, so let me just explain this a little bit. The killing is still going on, and one of the children of Israel, we should be looking at verse 15 later on, and we need to understand that verse 6 is a description of the events. Verse 15 gives us additional information who this one person is. Right? He's from the tribe of Simeon, which we will look at it. Who is this Midianite woman? The Midianite woman is a daughter of a king. Her name is Korzi. And he did it in the sight of Moses. Now, what do you mean in the sight of Moses? In the eyes of Moses. Now, what is so particular about this is that Moses actually married a Midianite woman, isn't it? The daughter of Jethro, a priest. And this is really taunting Moses. And the children of Israel are told not to cohabit or to intermarry with women in their local environment. But Moses had done this way before the instructions came. And he did it in the sight of all the congregation of the children of Israel, particularly the leaders, and they were weeping at the door of the tabernacle of meeting as a result of seeing this. Why? Because by law, this person must die. This person must die because this is about offending God and really dishonoring God with a Midianite woman. But as a background, I would urge you to go back and or go forward and read verse 15, because the Midianite woman is actually the daughter of a king, the most prominent king in the Midianite 5 kings. And of course, when she is a daughter of the Midianite 5 kings, nobody's about to touch her. And verse 7 comes the description of Pinchas. Pinchas is the focus now. Pinchas, the son of Eleazar, the son of Aaron the priest, saw it. He arose from among the congregation, took a javelin, and this would be a spear, right? A spear in his hand. He went after the man of Israel, a Simeonite, into the tent and thrust both of them through the man of Israel, the woman, through her body. And this has become an execution of sorts. Execution on behalf of God. So both the man and the woman had to die. And then the plague was stopped among the children of Israel. What is this plague? The slaughter. Whenever you read the word plague, don't think of it as a bubonic plague or the COVID plague or whatever. This really means God is striking at the children of Israel as a judgment. And men had to die because they committed adultery with the women of Moab and also committed religious adultery by bowing down to Baal Peor. And then that being with Moab, then this guy here, as the man of Israel, he did so with the Midianite women. And in this case, just read this, and those who died in the plague were 24,000 men. 24,000 men. And that is a lot of people to die in one day. In fact, it is almost the size of the smallest tribe. And these are 20,000 men in the children of Israel. It wasn't the women who died, it was the men who died. Now, understand who is Pinchas. Now, Pinchas is a son of Eleazar, who is a son of Aaron. That is a important relationship, right? Important relationship. So let me move on to verse 10 and then describe to you that relationship. In verse 10, the Lord spoke to Moses saying, Pinchas, the son of Eleazar, the son of Aaron, the Kohanim, right? The Kohen, has turned back my wrath from the children of Israel because he was zealous with my zeal among them, so that I did not consume the children of Israel in my zeal. Now we're going to look at two things here. Pinchas and zeal. Right? Pinchas and zeal. Now, Aaron, at the time when God blessed Aaron, Aaron had 4 sons. Aaron had 4 sons. Nadav, Avihu, both died. Then we have the 3rd and 4th son, which would be Eleazar and Itmar. And from Eleazar came Pinchas. When God initially blessed the Kohanim, God blessed Aaron and his sons who were with him, particularly Nadav and Avihu. So all 4 of them were blessed. But Pinchas wasn't born yet at that time. And so we'll take a look at the second part in verse 12. The next point I wanted to make was this zeal. The word zeal here in verse 11 is kana. And let me explain to you why this is a play of words and so important, at least for our own understanding. The word kana is also translated as jealous. In Exodus chapter 20, God says, do not have any idols before me, for I am a jealous God. I am a kana God. I'm a God who is kana. And this is that same word that we're using, zealous, zeal. God is a jealous God. God is a kana God. God is a zealous God. Now, what does jealous or kana actually mean? Kana has 2 meanings. The positive meaning is really to protect his flock. God is very protective of his flock, and that's one aspect of kana from a good side, a positive side. The negative side of kana is that God will punish because he is a jealous God. And that is important for us to understand. Zeal cuts both ways. When you're good with God, God will protect you. When you're bad with God, God will punish you. And in this case, we're talking about the negative aspect of kana, zeal. And so we are saying that Pinchas was zealous. He was protective of God's zeal, God's jealousy. God wants his people to be exclusive to him, and that he will protect them and guard them jealously so that nobody can take Israel away. But when Israel goes and do badly and offend God and offend the zeal of God or the kana of God, God's kana turns around to slaughter them and judge them. And so God says, because of what Pinchas did, I did not consume the children of Israel in my zeal. God did not destroy them. The word consume is to put an end. God is that close. Now, God has done this twice, right? God has done this twice where he told Moses, I'm going to destroy all of Israel. I'm going to start everything again. And Israel pleaded with God. Well, God almost reached to that point, but because of zeal that we need to understand, God is very passionate about himself being holy. God is very passionate about his people to remain holy, to remain separate and different from the rest of the nations. And so God is defending his passion, defending his honor. And Pinchas was the one who did just that. And so God spoke to Moses, say this, behold, I give him my Berit of Shalom. And it shall be to him and his descendants after him a covenant of an everlasting priesthood, because he was zealous for his God and made atonement for the children of Israel. What do you mean make atonement? But because of what he did, the anger of God was subsided and a covering was made. Right? Atonement means a covering. That God is not going to look at the sins of Israel to consume them, and the anger of God was ended. So look at this. God had made a covenant of everlasting priesthood, an olam of Kohanim. With who? Well, it says here, with Aaron, Nadav, Avihu, Eleazar, and Itmar, but never with Pinchas. Now, why did God do this? And this is something that we all need to understand. Why did God say, I will give to Pinchas my covenant of shalom? And what this means is, this is God showing favor on Pinchas. God is very happy with what Pinchas has done to be able to understand why God is so angry and to end the situation such that God's anger will be subsided. And God is very happy with what Pinchas has done. And with this, God gave him a covenant of peace, a covenant of shalom. And in so doing, accorded to his descendants as well, the everlasting priesthood, which means that from Pinchas, there will always be priests. That's what it means. And it is a special occasion where God honors Pinchas, right? Honors Pinchas. Now, verse 14 gives us a bit of information which I alluded to you. The name of the Israelite, the man who was killed, he was Zimri. That is his name. The son of Salu, a leader of the father's house among the Simeonites. Who was the woman? The Midianite woman who was killed was Kotzbi, the daughter of Zur, one of 5 kings, the head of the people of a father's house in Midian. And you see this in Numbers 31. I think in Numbers 31, we should be able to see who they are. This would be Numbers chapter 31. Numbers chapter 31 and verse 8. Now, what is so important about this statement in verse 14 and 15 is this. Kotzbi is the daughter of Zur. Midianite. And in this case, they are a big nation who can fight the Israelites. And nobody wants to go and cause trouble with the Midianite like God did. Through Pinchas, God says he has been zealous because of God's passion for his people. And because Pinchas was not afraid of the Midianites, king or no king, Kotzbi died. So did Zimri die. And this to show a very public kind of a lesson that no one is supposed to do this. And that was why Pinchas was rewarded and God showed favor upon him. Now, with the mention of verse 14 and 15 about the Midianites, by killing the daughter of the Midianite king, would attract a lot of attention from the Midianites. And look at verse 16. God says to Moses, harass the Midianites. This word here is to be hostile. It is to besiege. Beseech. That's the name. Go and attack the Midianites. Go and attack the Midianites. So the idea of harass here is also to strike. Now, this word attack, it is to strike. And so we have an A and a B. And the emphasis here is that the Israelites are to go after the Midianites. And this is a payback because in verse 18, they were besieging you. They were surrounding you. They were causing you distress. They were making you weak through their schemes. And the word scheme here is crafty, right? Is crafty. Means this is a form of trickery by which they seduce you in the matter of Peor, like the women of Moab. Now, this idea of seduce is from the same word schemes. It is to be crafty. Be crafty. To seduce. All right. In a matter of Peor, how? Eat, be merry, drink, and then tell the man here, this is the statue of Baal Peor. Why don't you all bow down to him? And the men did. And the second one is a matter of Kotzbi, the daughter of the leader of Midian, their sister, who was killed in the day of the slaughter of Peor. So understand that there are two incidences here. One, the matter of Peor, and two, of Kotzbi. This is about those who were killed in the day of the plague, and the plague means slaughter by killing. That's what it means, by killing. Because of Peor, Peor is about the Baal, and about the Baal means they worshipped the Baal. And with this, chapter 25 is so serious in the eyes of God that he has to come out to destroy these people because of how they turn their eyes away from God. Because of women. First, the women of Moab, and then the women of the Midianites. And so 20,000 people had lost their lives because of what they decided to do. And God says, the nation of Israel is supposed to be a holy nation. Holy means set apart, Holy means to be special to God, that they do not do what the rest of the people do. You don't marry Canaanites. You don't have harlotry with the Moabites. And eventually we see that the Midianites are being dealt with, but we do not see the Moabites being dealt with. Because eventually we will read about the book of Ruth, and Ruth comes from Moab. And so God had left Moab by itself, but God did not allow the Midianites to be having a free hand. Now understand, the Moabites, the Ammonites, they are all cousins of the Israelites. They were sons born to Lot through his daughters after the episode of Sodom and Gomorrah. And here we are told that God did not destroy Moab, and eventually we'll see that Ruth came from Moab. But God dealt with the Midianites because the Midianites violated God's kana, violated God's jealousy, violated God's serious, passionate feeling for them. And in so doing, God punished the Israelites. 20,000 died. But because of what Pinchas did by himself to demonstrate that he really cares for the feelings of God, that the feelings of God were offended and God was about to destroy them. And God says, good man, Pinchas, because he had dealt with the zeal of God. And so God showed favor. Now, this is important. God only showed favor to Aaron and the 4 sons, but this time round, God showed favor to Pinchas, who wasn't around at the time where Aaron and his sons were given this the covenant of the priesthood. And so now it is clear that God took a special favor on Pinchas because of what he has done. And God is serious about the behavior of Israel. You turn away from me, you die. And how did Balak knew what to do? The advice of Bilam or Balaam. And so because of that, Balaam had to be dealt with later on in chapter 31. And so what we are seeing is some serious matter in God's eyes. Now, we haven't got into the rest of the chapters, but eventually we will see how serious God is in dealing with the Midianites because they were part and parcel of the advice of Balaam in how to make Israel fall, but more importantly, how to make God angry with them. And so being, the judgment of God and the curse of God be upon Israel. And it happened. And God faulted Balaam. And with this, we come to the end of chapter 25.